Hello and welcome. I'm Asima Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Reports show that US President Donald Trump interrupted the meeting with European leaders to hold a call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The meeting took place 3 days after the Alaska summit, and White House has said a possible trilateral meeting with President Putin and President Zelenskyy may also be discussed. Meanwhile, President Zelenskyy has thanked White House for trying to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. US President Donald Trump, alongside Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the White House, rejected the need for an urgent ceasefire in the Russia-Ukraine war. Egypt and Qatar will push to apply maximum pressure for a Gaza ceasefire deal, as Hamas say they are reviewing a fresh proposal on halting the war in the enclave. This comes as pressure in Israel is mounting after mass protests on securing a hostage deal. French President Emmanuel Macron has called for a four-way summit, including Europeans, the US, Ukraine, and Russia, to discuss security guarantees. He made the proposal during a White House meeting with President Donald Trump, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and European leaders. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has stated that the US-South Korea joint military drills are a war provocation, then called for a rapid expansion of his country's nuclear arsenal. The drills launched this week by Seoul and Washington include enhanced responses to heightened North Korean nuclear threats ahead of a South Korea-US summit. Wildfires have destroyed over 450,000 hectares across Spain and Portugal, with 6 people passed away, including 2 firefighters, as officials battle 23 major blazes threatening communities. France, Italy, Slovakia, and the Netherlands, Sweden, and Morocco have sent air support, but heat waves, drought, and intense smoke are making firefighting operations extremely difficult. UN peacekeeping mission reported that rebel fighters had killed at least 52 civilians in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo in recent days. The attack adds to escalating violence in the region long plagued by armed groups. Burkina Faso's junta has expelled UN resident coordinator Carol Flores Smerchniak after a UN report accused Burkinabe forces of child rights violations in the conflict against jihadists. The United Nations rejected the expulsion, defending the report that documented recruitment, sexual violence, and attacks on schools and hospitals, all involving children. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy arrived in Washington yesterday for high-stakes talks at the White House. US President Donald Trump has said he is working to arrange a bilateral peace meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. He spoke of the plan after intensive talks on Monday at the White House with Zelenskyy and European leaders, which focused on long-term security guarantees for Kyiv. President Trump has said he spoke by phone with President Putin following the meetings and described the conversation as very good, indicating President Putin may be open to direct talks. President Zelenskyy has confirmed he is ready for bilateral encounter, which would be the first between the two leaders since Moscow's full-scale invasion. Let's listen into what he had to say.
We're going to have a meeting. I think if everything works out well today, we'll have a trilat. And I think there will be a reasonable chance of ending the war when we do that.
The US President hosted 7 European leaders to coordinate security guarantees for Ukraine, while Zelenskyy met Trump one-on-one in the Oval Office, describing it as their best conversation yet. Allies plan to formalize Ukraine's security guarantees within the next week to 10 days. As Trump says he is working to bring Putin and Zelenskyy to the table for a peace summit. French President Emmanuel Macron gave a statement after a multilateral meeting with US President Donald Trump, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and EU leaders. Here's what he said.
Et il a été acté qu'il y aurait d'abord la volonté de bâtir une séquence bilatérale entre le président Zelensky et le président Poutine, dans un endroit qui va être déterminé dans les prochaines heures, et qui sera suivi d'une réunion trilatérale avec le président Poutine, le président Trump, le président Zelensky. Je souhaitais que d'ailleurs tout ça soit suivi dans le processus d'une réunion qui inclura les Européens et d'ailleurs aussi les Turcs, c'est-à-dire tous ceux dont la sécurité est directement concernée par les suites de ce conflit. Je crois qu'il est convaincu maintenant, et le président Poutine le lui a redit, nous lui avons tous redit, qu'on ne peut pas discuter un traité de paix qui prend quand même plusieurs jours, voire plusieurs semaines, sous les bombes. Et qu'il a plusieurs fois lui-même exprimé une volonté aussi humanitaire d'arrêter les tueries et d'arrêter ce qui se passe contre les civils, et donc à cet égard, qui avait besoin d'avoir justement aussi une...
Now for this discussion, we're joined by Professor Jim Rice. He's a professor of international law, joins us live from Beacon. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now,
Good to see you, Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. So how do you see this? Is Trump genuine about bringing peace, or do you think his motive is just to get a nomination or a Nobel Peace Prize?
I certainly think that that's a large part of it. But I think more importantly, I think that it's very unlikely that Putin is serious or sincere in terms of actually wanting to end this war. And I think so for three reasons. The first is that Putin thinks that he's winning this war, and so he's not going to stop. He's not interested in peace. The second reason that Putin isn't serious about peace is because he believes, I think correctly, that he can successfully manipulate Donald Trump. And we saw that just last weekend when, prior to the Alaska summit, Trump said that he would expect a ceasefire before a final peace agreement. And then Putin said no, and then Trump came back and said that he didn't think that a ceasefire was necessary, flying in the face of all reason. And finally, third, Putin isn't serious about a real peace agreement because he knows that if he does end the war, that if the war would end now, that he would probably end up losing his position, if not being killed. So he has no interest at all in ending this conflict. Have you got a follow-up, assume?
Yes, and now what do you make of President Trump's efforts to broker a direct peace meeting between Zelensky and Putin? Could this mark a genuine shift in the conflict trajectory, even though you said that Putin might not be serious here?
Well, again, that's a great question. For my part, and again, I can't predict anything, but for my part, I believe that Putin will never agree to sit down with Zelensky in the same room or enter into direct talks directly with Zelensky. And the reason for that is because Putin doesn't believe that Zelensky is a legitimate president. After all, we know that at the Alaska meeting and prior to that, Putin has insisted upon bringing up the underlying causes or the root causes of this conflict. And this basically is code for a total capitulation is needed by the Ukrainian side. It means ousting Zelensky from office, demilitarizing the Ukraine, permanent guarantees of no Western alliances. And so, no, I don't think that there will be a meeting directly between Putin and Zelensky.
Thank you very much, Professor, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic now. Amidst high-stakes talks at the White House between President Trump and President Zelensky, thanked U.S. President Donald Trump for working to stop the killings and discussed security guarantees and arms purchases with him and European leaders. Despite the focus on peace, President Trump and President Zelensky again rejected an urgent ceasefire, with President Trump suggesting a full peace deal could proceed while fighting continues. President Zelensky described his private conversations with President Trump as their best yet. President Trump also announced that President Putin has agreed to Western security guarantees for Ukraine. President Zelenskyy said he's ready for a bilateral meeting with President Putin to end the war, and U.S. Senator Marco Rubio added that President Trump had suggested to Putin that he meet with the Ukrainian president. President Zelenskyy added that security guarantees from allies would be formalized within the next week to 10 days as talks continue to seek a lasting resolution to the conflict. Meanwhile, Russian envoy Dmitry Peskov says it was an important day for diplomacy, stressing the focus is on lasting peace, not just a temporary ceasefire. Now we go back to Professor Jim Rice of International Law. Professor, thank you for staying with us. I would like to take your analysis on why couldn't European leaders let President Zelenskyy go by himself to U.S. yesterday? Do you think they didn't trust him, or do you think they didn't trust President Trump?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was very pleased to find out on Sunday night that the European leaders from the Western democracies were intent on attending the talks in Washington. And they did so, I think, certainly not because they don't trust Zelenskyy, but rather because they were fearful that Trump and his cronies would bully and intimidate Zelenskyy for a second time, as they did on the 28th of February of this year. So I think it was absolutely essential and a great thing that the European allies attended. But what I noticed from that meeting that we probably just witnessed several hours ago was, as all of the Western leaders in terms of Merz and Macron and Keir Starmer and others, Maloney, as they were in that meeting with Trump, what occurred to me was they were all sitting there listening to Trump's spouting nonsense. And it occurred to me that what they were thinking was, the elephant in the room, as it were, was not that Trump is stupid or naive or a pawn of Putin, which he probably is, but worryingly, more importantly, that Trump doesn't share the same fundamental values as they do, as we do. Rather, Trump is a spiritual ally, if you will, not of the Europeans, not of the Americans, but rather of Putin. And this, to me, is very disturbing.
And do you think could continuing this conflict while also negotiating peace undermine trust in this process?
Well, I would say that it does, but as I mentioned before, I can't take this process seriously at all, simply because Putin does not want the war to end. Rather, he wants the war to end on his own terms. And if we just look at the demands that Trump has made, that he made in Alaska, he's basically calling for, all of this territory that he hasn't even seized yet. And apart from the fact that if he is able to get this territory, and it will leave open a road to Kyiv. It will be a strategic catastrophe for Ukraine. But more importantly than that, because in addition to being a scholar of international law, I'm also a human rights advocate. Just think of the millions of people, the hundreds of thousands of families and individuals who would be handed over from a democratic Ukraine to a totalitarian Russia under Trump. And just think of Bucha, where there were mass murders when the Russians invaded, or Mariupol. All of the places that Russia conquered, they butchered, murdered people, kidnapped children, and sent them to the interior of Russia. So it's more than just giving up land in exchange for peace. It's giving up people, it's giving up human beings, and this cannot be allowed to happen.
Yes, Professor, thank you very much for sharing that. Please stay with us as we stay on the topic now. In a series of statements following today's crucial diplomatic talks, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz underscored the need for a ceasefire before any talks with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, adding that preventing further conflict remains the top priority. Let's listen into what some of them had to say.
Enfin, si ce processus était refusé, nous sommes aussi tous d'accord pour dire qu'il faudra augmenter les sanctions et en tout cas avoir une posture qui mette plus de pression sur la partie russe pour revenir sur le terrain des négociations. Voilà en substance ce qui a été acté aujourd'hui.
Aus meiner Sicht wäre es wünschenswert und mehr als das, dass es nun spätestens mit diesem Treffen auch einen Waffenstillstand in der Ukraine gibt. Präsident Zelenskyy hat das auch seinerseits zum Ausdruck gebracht, dass er sich kaum vorstellen kann, zu einem solchen Treffen mit Putin zusammenzutreffen, ohne dass es eine Feuerpause gibt.
Yeah, well, today's meeting was good and constructive. And there was a real sense of unity between the European leaders that were there and President Trump and President Zelenskyy. And we had two material outcomes. The first, on the question of security guarantees, was the agreement that the coalition of willing countries, that's 30 countries already working together on security guarantees, will now work with the US on those guarantees, coordinating, and we have already commissioned our teams to do the detailed further work on that. That's really important for security in Ukraine, for security in Europe, and for security in the United Kingdom. The other material outcome was the agreement that will now be a bilateral agreement between President Putin and President Zelenskyy.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte emphasized that security guarantees were a central topic, with more details expected in the coming days. Rutte has also confirmed discussions about possible Article 5 type arrangements, but stressed that troops on the ground were not part of the conversation. Finland's President Alexander Stubb noted significant progress in Ukraine's situation, while also questioning President Putin's willingness to engage in the talks. Meanwhile, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer called the potential meeting between Ukraine and Russia and the US. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Professor Jim Rice. He's a professor of international law. Thank you, Professor, for staying with us. Now, yes, you've also mentioned that in our discussion that it's not only about giving land, it's the people, culture, language, everything involved there.
Right.
And with European leaders showing different priorities, even among the coalition they have for Ukraine, some demanding a ceasefire first, others pushing talks forward. How unified is the Western Front in shaping the next phase for the Ukraine conflict?
Well, I would say that that's a rare bit of good news. I think that the European allies are very unified in calling whether look, they know that Trump has abandoned the idea, the essential idea of a ceasefire prior to peace talks. And Trump did this because Putin wanted it that way. As for the Europeans, I think that they know that they have to deal with Trump. And I think that everyone is aware, as I've mentioned earlier, that Trump shares the same values with Putin rather than with themselves, whether with, democratic rule under the, the Constitution, the rule of law, freedom. Instead, Trump subscribes to a authoritarian version of governance. And I think that this is quite obvious in terms of the way that he's governed since he's come to power. Is there anything else I can help you with? You were asking about unity on the part of the Europeans.
Yes, that's all for now, Professor. Thank you very much for always joining us and sharing your insight as a professor of international law. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Middle East. Hamas has said that it has approved the latest Gaza ceasefire proposal from Qatari and Egyptian mediators and is ready to resume talks. The draft includes a 60-day halt to fighting half the Israeli captives swapped for Palestinian prisoners, and expanded aid access. Hamas called it the beginning of a comprehensive solution. On the other hand, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that Hamas is under atomic pressure, while Defense Minister Katz and far-right allies rejected concessions, insisting military operations will continue. Israeli officials also admit to manpower shortages as calls for conscriptions grow. Qatar's Prime Minister and Egypt's President have stressed the urgency, warning conditions in Gaza are beyond imaginations, with famine deaths already mounting. Amnesty International has accused Israel of deliberately using starvation as a weapon. Meanwhile, Israel's military chief told commanders the war is at a turning point, with the next phase of Operation Gideon's Chariots focused on intensified strikes in Gaza City. Let's listen into what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had to say.
שוחחתי עם שר הביטחון והרמטכ"ל על התוכניות שלנו לגבי העיר עזה והשלמת משימותינו. ואני, כמוכם, שומע את הדיווחים בתקשורת, ומהם אתם יכולים להתרשם מדבר אחד. החמאס נמצא בלחץ אטומי.
Now for this discussion, we are joined by Dr. Wael Awad. He's a Middle East affairs expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you, Dr. Wael, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, with this continued Israeli military operations and the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, how sustainable do you think is Israel's approach in balancing military objectives with international pressure, also domestic pressure rising for humanitarian solution?
Thank you for having me. I think what Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to do is deceive the public opinion of Israel and the rest of the world that the occupation of Gaza is a temporary process, is not a permanent, and his own main objective is to get the hostages released and also to end Hamas' existence in the Gaza Strip. But the fact of the matter is the war continues, the killing of the Palestinians continue, the genocide is continuing, and also the starvation, which is a new method of killing the remaining of the 2.2 million Palestinians are in a concentration camp in Gaza, have been subjected to. So I think the master of deceptions that he's been using, Mr. Netanyahu, is only to deceive the public. It's only the Israeli internal pressure can put pressure on him, because now he's buying time, and buying these times only because the Knesset is already on a vacation and there will be a gap. So he is trying, he knows that there is no threat to his government currently. What he is trying to achieve is military objective and complete the total annihilation of the Gaza Strip.
And do you think there could still international mediation like Qatar and Egypt's effort significantly alter this trajectory of where the conflict is going towards?
I think he is under tremendous pressure, as you said, and the global pressures as well. Because of that reason, he is sending his team for the negotiation and saying that there could be now, there is already agreement by Hamas for the suggestion by Egypt and Qatar, but it is yet to be approved by the Israelis. And I am sure because he is adamant about the objective of the process, so therefore he is just buying time. Nothing else. He will never agree on a ceasefire. No one can stop him. United States is very much approving all his measures. He is having the blessing of President Trump. The internal pressure only is rising because they know that now the main objective of the Israeli government, not even to get one of the survivors of the Israelis hostages. The reason for this, they are all mostly military person and they consider them as a dead person. So the families of the hostages are in the street. Millions of Israelis have gone to the street against the current government policy. And if you watch the television and the media of Israel, they are openly saying it, that it is only Netanyahu who is delaying that sort of a deal with the Hamas or with the to end this war. So therefore, if you are objective already clearly saying that you do not want to end this war on a temporary ceasefire. He just even buying the time. Even if you go for a temporary ceasefire, he will resume the war. Because now Netanyahu, which has been avoiding to say to the world that his dream is to see a great Israel, and he is having this spiritual, divine has come to his soul that he wanted to achieve the Israeli objective of having a great Israel from Euphrates to Nile, which is including Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula, and 1/3 of Saudi Arabia. So if that is the dream, and the rest of the world is watching what's happening in Gaza, what will happen in Gaza will happen in the rest of these countries, because all these countries are inhabited of people. So it's not a land without people. So I think we need to put international pressure. In the United States have to understand the sentiment of the human a feeling among the international community that what is going on inside Gaza is nothing less than a total annihilation and a genocide acted by the Israeli occupational forces.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Weil, for joining us and sharing your insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Asia. China and India's top diplomats met in New Delhi to improve ties amid global economic challenges. Indian Foreign Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi held talks on border peace, trade, and cooperation. Both sides agreed to focus on mutual respect and building a stable partnership. Wang Yi has emphasized seeing each other as partners, not rivals. Aiming to boost regional stability, the meeting signals a positive step towards easing tensions and enhancing dialogue between the two Asian powers. Discussions also covered economic collaboration and efforts to maintain peace along the border. The visit is part of ongoing efforts to strengthen bilateral relations. Let's listen into what Wang Yi, Foreign Minister of China, and Subramaniam Jaishankar, Foreign Minister of India, had to say.
We should develop confidence to dispel interference, expand cooperation, and to further consolidate the momentum of improvement and development of China-India relations so that while pursuing our respective rejuvenation, we can contribute to each other's success and provide the most needed certainty and stability to Asia and the world.
Having seen a difficult period in our relationship, Excellency, our two nations now seek to move ahead. This requires a candid and constructive approach from both sides. In that endeavor, we must be guided by the three mutuals: mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and mutual interest. Differences must not become disputes, nor competition, conflict.
Now for this discussion, we are joined by Tomohiko Taniguchi. He's a former advisor to late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. How would you assess the current state of India-China relations, especially in light of recent border tensions and regional, is it rivalry or now partners?
Few nations may speak of them as rivals, yet once such words are uttered, rivalry is bound to follow. It's far better for you to work as a partner with China. And indeed, Japan and many other nations in the world seek that relationship with China. But never, ever presume that you are going to be China's peer, because for thousands of years, the sense of peer has remained very much foreign to the Chinese. The Chinese have never had any peer in its history. And I think Minister Jaishankar is fully aware of that.
And now with both countries emphasizing economic collaboration, what do you think what challenges might arise in balancing their economic interests with ongoing strategic rivalries and the history you've mentioned behind them?
Well, that's a gray zone many of us have to continue to live with. Japan has had a very similar relationship with China. And India, as a growing superpower in the 21st century, is going to be viewed as nothing but a rival from the Chinese. So it's a very much shaky relationship, notwithstanding India and China have to continue to live with that gray zone reality.
And what do you think, what role do India and China play in shaping the broader balance of power in Asia, particularly through forums like BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization?
I think India is very much shrewd in hedging many of its stakes by becoming a partner nation in different international organizations, including the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But at the same time, India and people in India have been extremely acutely aware that when it comes to fundamental values, there is very little that India could share with China. And I think that constitutes the core identity of the Indian people, that India has run very much a proud democratic institutions in its history, and that will remain the case.
Do you think this can last to a long-term peace along their shared border between India and China?
For the moment, I would say yes, because China sees this as a very much important and beneficial opportunity for them to give a sort of charm assault to its neighboring nations, among which India stands out as one of the most important neighboring nations. So, so long as this is the case, there will be tranquility for some time along the border.
Thank you, Thank you, Tomohiko Taniguchi, for staying with us. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has vowed to rapidly expand the country's nuclear arsenal, calling U.S.-South Korea military drills an obvious expression of their will to provoke war, local state media has reported today. Seoul and Washington has launched their annual 11-day Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises this week, which include nuclear response scenarios, while both allies insist the drills are defensive. Pyongyang denounced them as hostile rehearsals for invasion. Kim has speaking during a visit to Navy destroyers said the security environment required North Korea to accelerate nuclear armament. Analysts say this reflects Pyongyang's refusal to accept denuclearization. The drills come ahead of a Trump-Lee summit in Washington, where North Korea's weapons program is expected to be a key focus. Let's listen into what the KRT News leaders had to say.
김정은 동지께서는 이미 강조하였지만 우리 국가가 직면한 안전 환경은 날로 심각해지고 있으며 조성된 정세는 우리로 하여금 현존 군사 리론과 실천에서의 획기적이고도 급속한 변화와 핵무장화의 급진적인 확대를 요하고 있다고 말씀하셨습니다. 미국과 한국의 합동군사 연습은 조선민주주의인민공화국의 가장 적대적이며 대결적이려는 자기들의 의사를 숨김없이 보여주는 뚜렷한 입장 표명으로 된다고 낙인하십니다.
And for this discussion, we go back to Tomohiko Taniguchi. He's a former advisor to late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Thank you for staying with us. Now, how does Kim Jong-un's vow to expand North Korea's nuclear arsenal affect the security dynamics in the region?
One has to point out first and foremost, whenever large-scale U.S. ROK military drills take place, it's been customary for North Korea to use that kind of harsh and strong words. What's different now is that North Korea is pretty much capable of building its own nuclear arsenal. So one has to take into consideration, very much serious consideration, and I think South Korea has already started to look at it very much seriously. But at this point, when South Korean administration is quite new under the opposition or the progressive administration, I think Kim Jong-un is testing the resilience and perseverance of the current South Korean presidency. South Korean presidency lasts only 5 years, and among the democratic nations, their presidency tends to become weak as time goes by. And I think there will be an intra-party struggle going on inside the ruling party, what sort of attitudes, behavior they should adopt towards North Korea. And I think that's one of the objectives that Kim Jong-un has in his mind.
And with North Korea's refusal to denuclearize and the ongoing military drills reaction, is there any realistic path for de-escalation, or has the situation become too entrenched?
The short answer to your question is, in the future, immediate future, there will be no quick solution at all. North Korea is better capitalized, if you like, with its growing international relationships with Russia, China, and Iran. And so Kim Jong-un has never been as confident as he is now. So for the time being, North Korea is going to pursue the sort of trajectory that we are witnessing at the moment.
And do you think that, is there any international pressure or new security guarantees for North Korea? Would that help reduce its nuclear ambitions?
No, I don't think so. North Korea always wishes to stand as a partner, as a equal sort of entity vis-a-vis the United States. And North Korea is very much wishing to attract attentions from President Trump, because when President Trump was in office previously, there were bilateral meetings, and Kim Jong-un wants to do that again. And the threat of nuclear armament for Kim Jong-un is going to serve that purpose.
For joining us and sharing your insight all the way from Japan. Thank you very much. This is all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.